Nelson P. Repenning is a renowned MIT professor. Don Kieffer is a senior lecturer and former Harley Davidson Operational Excellence VP. Their newest book is There's Got to Be a Better Way: How to Deliver Results and Get Rid of the Stuff That Gets in the Way of Real Work. Welcome to the show, Nelson and Don.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Yeah,
George. Nice to be here.
excited to have you guys on. Well, tell us why you decided to write the book.
Don, why don't you go first?
Uh, well, we've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I think we decided we should probably write it down because before it gets lost or you get too old to remember what it was. So I think that's the short story. But I think we've been doing this for a long time, and we think we're onto something important, and we wanted to help spread the word.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, George, we're an unlikely duo, which we may get to a little bit in the future. I'm a lifetime academic, live in the ivory tower, been there my whole career. Don is a lifetime executive, actually doing stuff in the real world. And I think our collaboration has produced a way to think about work and hopefully make it better that I'm not sure you'd find from someone that was on just one side of the fence that we work on. And so we hope we have some good that'll help people make their jobs better. And we want to get the word out there.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate that. How'd you guys meet each other?
So it all started, I had as a young faculty member and actually as a grad student, an NSF grant, National Science Foundation, that at the time had a very unusual feature, which is you had to have a corporate partner in order to get the grant. And Harley Davidson had raised their hand to participate. And I was working with a colleague of Don's who was in charge of quality for Harley. And we're walking down the hall one day, and he said, "Boy, you really got to meet this guy, Don Kieffer. He's really shaking things up." And so we had a completely impromptu lunch in their corporate cafeteria. And like all good things in life, thanks to a completely random occurrence, we've had a 30-year collaboration that, has spawned this book and lots of other good work along the way.
Been a good 30 years, Don?
It has, and that first conversation is was kind of a prelude to the 30 years. I was a self-taught guy working in manufacturing and had taught my way into leading a big engine program, the most important project Harley had done in a long time. And of course, everything I was doing and learning was super exciting and super new. And Nelson, as a typical academic, knew the field and knew the concepts and knew the whole thing already academically. So I very enthusiastically showed him what I had done to refigure the product development process, which actually was a stage gate process, which was, had been invented a long time ago. Nelson just stepped back, looked at me, he says, "Don, why don't you read a book once in a while? You don't have to invent everything yourself." But another time I showed him something that we were doing. It was, working well, but it was just kind of normal behavior for me. And Nelson said, well, wait a minute. I want to understand more about this. And I was puzzled because it just seemed quite normal to me. He's like, what's big deal about this? He said, well, there's really not a lot written in the literature about this, but what's written says you should do exactly the opposite that you're doing, but your results are stunning. So I want to understand this more. And luckily, I was clever enough to realize this is maybe a guy I should hang on to because I was sort of a loose cannon, shaking up everything at once. And I think the discipline and rigor of the academic part of Nelson helped aim that cannon into really effective ways. And that's kind of been our batting the ball back and forth for almost 30 years.
Nice. So Nelson says, why don't you read a book? And you say, no, I'm not going to. I'm just going to have you on speed dial.
Yeah, exactly.
That's about right.
Exactly.
That's the pragmatic guy right
This
there.
is like
Don.
two lifetimes into one. Yeah.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of wisdom there for sure. All right. So you guys have been kicking around these problems slash opportunities for several decades. What was the motivator that said, okay, it's finally time? You don't want to forget this. More specifically, what is the problem that you guys seek to solve?
So I think the thing that I was most interested in is when I was a grad student at MIT, most of my colleagues, faculty, and students were working on building new tools. So at the time, the quality tools were big. So it was algorithms and decision support tools and so on and so forth. And quite frankly, it seemed like that was a hard place to make progress because there were so many smart people doing so many amazing things. And I kind of stumbled upon a question at that moment, which basically boiled down to, do people actually use these tools that we are spending so much time inventing? And it turned out that the answer to that question was, at best, once in a while, or not all that often. And that really sort of created my life's work as an academic, which is, how do you get complicated organizations to do new things, particularly when we all agree that these are good things to do? And I don't think I really understood at the time that that was a problem that was even bigger than organizations, right? How do we get ourselves to go to the gym or eat healthier? But it's a particular problem, I think, in the organizational context. Um, and I think where Don's and my collaboration really came in is that Harley was a great company, fabulous culture, was trying to do a lot of stuff. They'd been an early adopter of many Toyota style methods. And yet, in some cases, were enormously successful, and others really struggled to do what seemed like pretty obvious things. And so, from my point of view, it was really an opportunity to think hard about what seemed like this very fundamental question, which was, we all know that we should do X, and yet we persist in doing Y. And that's one of the things that Don and I have been working on ever since.
I think for me, George, we had been solving problems and then trying to figure out how to do it better for since 1996. And I think after about 15 years, one day Nelson said to me, Don, the stuff we're doing, this is way beyond what Toyota or Lean or Agile, all this stuff is. There's something different here. And he took some time off and did the research, did the reading, and went all the way back, 100 years in terms of the theory of organizations and the theories of work. And he decided there was something new there. And so we worked to define it in a particularly practical way without a lot of rules, tools, and rituals and speaking different languages, something approachable because I was a problem solver. That's what made my career. So I was always looking for a way to get results faster and easier that normal people could use and without having someone tell you have to do the 37 steps. And that's how we came up with the principles. And I think once those principles started to come into focus, we knew we had something new, and we knew we had to. We knew we had to. We started teaching it. Nelson's had to open the door into the executive MBA, which he was the faculty, in charge of the faculty stuff for. So he and the MBA. So we started teaching it, and we started getting results much more broadly than just us doing it ourselves. And I think as that developed, we said we've got to somehow capture this in an understandable, really clear way for people. And we started working on the book for 5 years or whatever it took to finally get it all right. It's easy to do something, but trying to write down what it is you're doing, especially something complex, is a whole different animal. And it took a long time to get it on paper exactly right.
I wonder if that's a sort of a microcosm for everything you're working on.
Yeah, it is.
Try
I
to
think
fit
so.
too much in, try to do too many things,
Yeah, exactly
boil the
right.
ocean.
You got it exactly right.
So something that normal people can use, so it's not a 45 step process. So what is the practical application? Is it only for big companies? Is this for individuals? Is it for
So it's a great question, and it often comes up in class in a version of, we try to use examples from, we've worked in dozens of different industries, and students will ask, well, okay, great, you showed us these industries, but does it work in my industry? And the way I always respond is the stuff that we teach only works in organizations that have people in them. And because I think in the end of the day, the stuff that we do is really about how humans engage with work and doesn't have a ton to do with, whether it's a semiconductor or oil and gas or something like that. And so I think the problems that we work on are particularly acute in really big organizations because they often tend to lose their dynamism, which is a core of what we do. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Um, but I think for anyone that engages with work on a daily basis, I think the tools can help. And, we always like to say, even our accountant was able to use some of these tools to make their tax season run a little bit more smoothly. They were a 3 or 4 person operation. So it's really just about how you get your work done each day.
And just to add on to that, it is about organizing human work, not about the work humans do. So we can't teach surgeons how to do surgery better, but we can get help the surgeon get the right information, the right people, get the room set up, make sure the tools are there so that when it's time to do the surgery, it happens on time and it happens without interruption. Starting from the diagnosis, just imagine the flow of all the information and people and material to get that surgery done. So that's kind of an operational issue. So that's kind of that flow of work is really what we focus on. And it doesn't really matter if it's visible work or invisible work, um, what kind of industry. It's all about the human work. And I think the other thing that makes it two other things make it approachable, George. One is that we work on five kind of pretty clear principles about how to design human work, what it looks like. So you can use it as a checklist, almost like, okay, something's going wrong here, and just go down one of those five things or more of them are not right. And we've done this, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of times. I can't remember an operational problem that didn't hinge on one of these principles. And it's not like, oh, be a leader. It's material things that you can go look and see. And the other thing that makes it really approachable is the approach, which is we always start small, get a clear problem statement, then go investigate, actually find out what's going on and experiment quickly, figure out the dynamics of what's going on. Like boil water in a thimble. You don't need to boil the whole ocean. Boil water in a thimble so you understand the mechanics of water boiling. Once you know that, now the next thing is like, okay, how do we expand that? How do we boil it in a pot? How do we boil it with impurities? How do we take it to scale? But the first thing is actually like run a small experiment to make sure you actually understand what the problem is and what it's going to take to fix it. And I think that's approachable on the executive level, the management level, where they're trying to align stuff, and the front line where they're just trying to get work to flow and things to work. So we have found it really kind of an overarching kind of framework that can be scaled to any type of work or any level of work or any industry.
I imagine if you approached a large organization and said, we're going to change all this, you probably wouldn't be well received.
No.
There's an interesting question there because often the bigger challenge we have is the opposite one, which is following the approach Don just outlined. Particularly if we get a call from a senior executive, we'll tell them start with one small problem, go to the shop floor or the R&D lab and fix one thing. And well, I'm a senior executive. I have big problems to work on. I don't have time to, get involved in the details. Um, but I think what's going on there is they're really missing how organizational change actually works, which is when you try to change things from the top, they don't have any idea about how the work is actually done in their organization. So they're just as likely to push it in the wrong direction or in the right direction. And so when they get involved in the details, they learn a ton about how the organization actually works. And then the other thing I see with my students over and over again is that as they get more senior, they fail to understand that everybody's watching them to figure out what behaviors are okay in the organization. And so they underutilize the symbolic power they have as senior leaders in the organization. And so if they get involved in solving real problems on the ground, it's a really powerful message that they send to the rest of the organization that this is what's valued around here is we want people that are actually willing to get their hands dirty. So we have to make a big deal about the start small. And we always tell the students like, look, it's going to feel like you're working below your pay grade when you get started, but don't worry, you're going to get, a much more sustainable change if you go with that direction and can kind of go against your instincts to get started.
Yeah, there's a part in the book where I have the lights go on for me, where I had a guy from Toyota was actually coaching me. I was running the engine factory at Harley, and I wanted to do something big, and he's telling me, no, go back to the shop floor. And I'm thinking, no, I've been there, done that. I'm supposed to do big stuff. And he helped me turn me around. And it was a big turning point in this whole piece for me where the lights went on and said, oh, okay, now I get what this is all about. But we've had people tell us, we're not hiring you because that can't work. There's a pharma company right in Kendall Square that called me up and they had a problem with work flowing between a supplier and a lab and to the headquarters from Boston to Louisville to Indianapolis. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll get on a plane. I'll spend a day or two in Louisville, a day or two in Indianapolis, and come back and give you a plan. And we'll cut the time this work takes to flow in half. Probably it takes 6 weeks to implement it, but I just need to go find out where the problems are. And it was a big company, but I said, let's pick one place and I'll show you how this works. And the guy called me back a week later and said, well, Don, we're not going to hire you because it just can't be that easy. And he hung up the phone. He wanted the $1 million strategy book and the McKinsey report and the statistics and coffee cups and banners and sign on blood with your name that you're dedicated. He wanted a big program, and I go like, well, we have to go find out what's wrong first, and we'll fix it, and then we'll show you how to expand it. It's like, no, like, it's just too easy. Can't work.
That's really interesting. Is that fear of having something so small be under your nose or having been under your nose for a long time?
We love to say to our students and our clients, because we as Nelson says, we make them do a project and they have to work below their pay grade to go see the front line, see the work actually happening. And oh no, no, no. And what we tell them is if you're not embarrassed by what you find in your under your own roof, you're just not looking hard enough. And Nelson can testify to he tell the story, Nelson, about your favorite days in class.
Yeah, so when we teach this a class where we ask students to do projects, there's an assignment where they have to go see the work, do exactly what Don just described. And I'll give you a concrete example. I had a student this year who's a kidney transplant surgeon, and so his go see the work, he was trying to improve the turnaround time of their operating rooms. And I said, so Joe, you've got to go watch the whole process of how all the equipment and instruments and stuff gets to the OR so that you can get started. And he's like, okay, yeah, whatever, all right, and I always joke that you have to do it because I'm the instructor and I give the grades and so on and so forth. My favorite moment in class is when they come back after that assignment and I always say, so did anybody find anything embarrassing? And you can see like people's eyes are about this big. And just to take this one student, as he's watching the work, nurses would open up the kits that have the scalpels and all the complicated instruments, and they would come in these plastic things that they were supposed to be sterilized. As he's watching, a nurse is opening five, six, seven kits to find one that's actually clean. And so then he's like, well, what's wrong with the sterilization process? So he walks back, and it turns out the autoclave that they use to sterilize them is old and it doesn't work. And there's only one person that knows where to tap it on the side to get it to turn on, and so on and so forth. And so that one little exercise, caused him to walk through 15 different steps required to get the operating room ready to go. And we see this over and over and over again. And people just can't believe all the chaos that's happening in their organizations. And I think the thing that people don't understand is that the reason that happens is because your organization is staffed by smart, talented people who, when something is wrong, get out their duct tape and safety pins and they just figure out how to make it work. But because they're trapped in a design that doesn't work, you get all these little sort of local kind of under the water adaptations that don't necessarily add up to an organization that actually works. And when we can bring all those local adaptations sort of above the waterline so people can see them, you can both leverage the power and the talent of the people who do the work, and you can often make the system work way better relatively quickly, actually.
But their first intuition, George, is like, well, can't we get an app to get people here on time and get this stuff on time, instead of going to look, see what's really happening.
It's so perfectly human.
Yeah, exactly right.
Exactly. It's
Exactly
about
right.
human work, George. It's not about an industry. It's about how humans work and how they like to work. Yeah.
I love everything about that and just recognizing just it's got to be so common and there's probably most
Oh,
every organization, if you were to take a hard look or invite them to go to the shop floor, whatever their shop might be, they're going to find something.
yeah, for sure.
And they're always amazed when we go on site and do a day or two assessment. No matter how big the company or how complex the industry, people are just amazed. Like after 2 days, we give them back a picture, draw a picture and show them what's happening and go like, how did you guys get that in 2 days? Yeah, you really captured what's happening. The picture looks like it, the work feels. How did you do that in like 2 days? Because it's not work specific. It's about the flow of work from humans to humans. Yeah,
And you're not inside the jar.
exactly.
Right.
You're not inside the jar. Well, okay. So this is all making perfect sense to me. But how do I know which problem to start with? Is that obvious?
So it's a great question. And actually, I think there's two answers to it. One is we make a big deal in the book about formulating good problem statements. And this is a place where, to a degree, I think you're fighting the psychology a little bit because, without sort of dragging you through sort of all the psychology and neuroscience, we have two basic systems in which we engage with the world. There's sort of the conscious processing and the automatic. And the automatic is, effectively a large language model, although obviously our brains came before the large language models that are so popular today. But we learn through pattern recognition. And so experienced managers like Don build this huge library of patterns that allow them to respond to situations in their organizations extremely quickly and extremely efficiently. And 95% of the time, that works great. The problem is, though, is that when you're working always based on past experience, right, it tends to be a very small C conservative thing in the sense that your brain produces a solution that worked last time. So what we try to get people to do when they face these sort of thorny problems that they can't get rid of, like turning around the operating room, is to formulate a problem statement first, which is just how do we, get the operating room turned around in 30 minutes rather than a minute, than an hour. So you can see that gap really clearly. Um, and if you notice the way I said that, right, there's no solution or diagnosis embedded in that, right? It's just focused on the problem that we're trying to solve. So I think actually formulating the problem correctly is probably more important than which problem you choose, because now we're able to engage some of that high-powered cognition. But I also think that exercise gets people to really focus on what is it the organization actually cares about. Well, we want to get more people through the operating room. Okay, well, let's go with that. Because I think in the day-to-day flux, we get so focused on solutions that we kind of lose sight of the activity. So it's wise to spend a little time thinking about the first thing you're going to work on, but I think often just pick a problem that you can formulate clearly. And as you go see that we just talked about, you're going to discover 50 other things that suddenly need your attention. And so the work gets started relatively quickly. And Don's done this a million times in his, practical work.
Yeah, what we tell people is, take a small bite of a big important problem, not moving water fountains or is the food in the cafeteria okay, but like our sales are down, our revenue is down, or the lead time is long, or there's a huge backlog. Then go pick one small piece of that problem and go see what's happening. So that's the easiest thing is if you try to solve the whole thing at once, one, you don't really know what's happening. And if you pick something off to the side, no one's going to care. So get one piece of a small bite of a big important problem that you can track up to metrics on the balance sheet or the income statement. Like what's really hurting? It's like sales or shipping or quality. And when you figure that out, what happens if you pick it small enough and you figure it out and fix it, it might be a small area, but we typically, George, we tell people if you're not sure what your target should be for improvement, pick 30%. Almost every time it works. And when you get a 30% improvement, even if it's a small thing, the learning that you have about what's causing and the dynamics in the bigger project just light up managers and executives' minds about now I see a path to get there with lights up their experience because now they can actually see what's wrong. But that's the trick. Get a small piece of a really important problem and go dive into it deeply.
I love it. So what can people expect when they get their copy of There's Got to Be a Better Way?
I think there's two pieces, as Don said. There's an approach, which is start small, make sure you understand the work and kind of work out in concentric circles. And then we have 5 principles for how human beings engage with work. And we purposely didn't number them. We spent a lot of time dealing with this, which is if you follow the approach, the principle that is most appropriate, I think, for your work will sort of naturally emerge from that investigation. And so, the metaphor that we use all the time is, this is not a diet book, it's a lifestyle change, right? It will help you really think about how you can engage with your work differently on a day-to-day basis. And, I think the ultimate goal, one of the catchphrases we use all the time is for many organizations, the system manages them rather than they're managing it, right? You show up every day and you just kind of deal with whatever fire shows up. And I think if, we've shown over and over again, if you use the approach and the rules over time, you will regain control of your organization so that you're actually guiding where your organization is going rather than just reacting to the latest fire or crisis.
Now, I think people will get a very fun and very practical read. This is not about us studying 5 industries and writing papers about what other people did. This is Nelson's story and my story and our journey, and has a lot of personal stories about the work at Harley Davidson, the changes Nelson did at MIT during COVID, and some of our colleagues. The biggest case study we have was one of our partners, Sheila Dodge, is the COO of the Broad Institute, which does DNA sequencing, who has been a client of ours for over a dozen years. So So this real stories and all stuff that we have personally done and not just studied something else and made up. So we've actually let the principles and the approach emerge from the stories, which is our history. Is like, let's not give a theory and then try to find evidence for it. Let's see what's happening and see if we can make a theory out of what we find. And so I think it's a very engaging read. It's very practical. Um, it's got both of our personalities. One, it's very practical, easy to read, but it's also based in research, highly organized and rigorously done from Nelson's point of view. So I think that's the value of the partnership. But it's actually the feedback we've got is a fun read and gives people lots of ideas of what they can do to get started.
I love it. Well, Nelson and Don, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people learn more about the two of you? How can they engage? And where can they get their copy of There's Got to Be a Better Way?
This is yours,
So
Nelson.
yeah, so it's available for pre-order on Amazon. So if you type either our names in or the title, it'll come up right away. The book drops in just about 2 months. You can also find out about me on my MIT website, just regular faculty website. So if you type my name into Google, same goes for Don. And then if you're interested in the practical side, you can also find us at shiftgear.work, which is the little company we founded to help.
Actually, it's .com now, Nelson.
Oh, sorry about that. Shiftgear.com. But if you put either of our names into Google, you'll come up with all the relevant citations or the relevant links.
Excellent. Well, if you enjoyed this as much as I did, show Nelson and Don your appreciation. Share today's show with a friend who also appreciates good ideas. Pick up your copy of There's Got to Be a Better Way, How to Deliver Results and Get Rid of the Stuff that Gets in the Way of Real Work. Just put Nelson and Don's name into your favorite search engine to track them down. And then if you are an organization who's trying to do the things that we've been talking about today, go to shiftwork.com.
Shift gear.
Shiftgear.com.
Gear.com. All one word.
It's
Shiftgear.com.
if you guys could do an intervention on my handwriting, that would be helpful. Thank you again, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Thank you so
George.
much. This is great. Appreciate it, George.
Until next time, remember, do your part by doing your best.